Hi, everyone. My name's Howard Coombs. I have the privilege of being the director for the Center of International and Defense Policy. And today it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Drew Lanier. He is the United States Visiting Defense Fellow at the Center for International Defense Policy. He was commissioned as a field artillery officer in May of 2004 and transitioned into the Adjutant General Corps in June of 2011, where he currently serves as a senior human resources officer. Drew has 21 years of service in the United States Armed Forces, holding various command and staff positions. He's been deployed operationally to Iraq in 2008 for security and stability operations, and to Liberia in 2014 to address the Ebola virus disease outbreak. Drew holds a Bachelor of Science from West Point and a master's degree in management and leadership from Webster University. He's received multiple awards, including the Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, and Army Commendation Medal. Today, Lieutenant Colonel Lanier will be presenting the Canadian Armed Forces State of Readiness, Degraded with no signs of improvement in sight. Please join me in welcoming Drew to the forum.
All right, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? All right, wonderful. Thank you for being here today. I very much appreciate it. Howard, thanks for the amazing intro. Like you said, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Drew Lanier. I'm a U.S. Army soldier. I am absolutely honored to be here and be the Visiting Defense Fellow on behalf of the U.S. Army War College. I hope everyone was able to get something to eat. I'm a firm believer that any meeting or conference without food should have been an email. Thanks CIDP for arranging this event, securing this location, and for providing the food. So here's our agenda. And here's my introduction and purpose of research. So as Howard said, I've been in the Army nearly 22 years. First joining in 1999, commissioning, and then serving as a field artilleryman for about 7 years, and then transitioning to a senior human resources officer, now going on 14 years. So why am I here? Well, since 1983, the U.S. Army War College has sent a senior service college select officer to Queen's University. As a visiting defense fellow, Queen's is one of more than 80 fellowships that Army officers participate across the globe. In February of 2024, I found out I was selected to attend the Naval War College in Rhode Island. We're excited, but also a little disappointed because this fellowship was at the top of our preferences, but another officer was named. Fast forward 2 months, we had signed a lease on a house in Rhode Island, coordinated our move, picked out the schools for our kids to go, and I got a call. The officer slated to come to Queens said something come up, precluded him from coming to Canada, and they asked if we wanted to come. Although it had been a lot of work to change everything 2 months before we moved, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to come to Kingston. So we absolutely wanted to be here. Like I said, we were ecstatic to go to the Naval War College, but having the opportunity to come here really was a privilege. Since then, it's turned out to be a very interesting time to be an American in Canada. Not to mention being one that has a Tesla. I got to get some stickers for it. Very different today than it was when we arrived last summer. Regardless, I'm thankful for this opportunity, for the expertise of those in CIDP, at RMC, and across Queens who have assisted me in my research, and just for being awesome and welcoming teammates. Being here has certainly increased my awareness of Canada as a northern neighbor, but better, my respect for the amazing Canadians we've met along the way. So why Canadian readiness? Well, upon my arrival in July 2024, I plan to research something 100% centric on the US military, with absolutely zero applicability to Canada. However, as I got settled, I was intrigued by conversations from my fellow CAF fellows, both here today, regarding the CAF's operational state and overall readiness. Being an HR guy and soon to be a G1 responsible for the personnel readiness of a 4-star Army Major Command, researching the CAF's readiness was right up my alley. So the purpose of my research: when I arrived, the CAF's death spiral talk was already unleashed, and without equivocation, the US and Canada were the closest allies with the longest and most peaceful history of any two bordering countries. A little bit has changed in the geopolitical realm since July. However, my purpose and intentions have not changed. I sought to dig into the CAF's readiness as a U.S. service member, looking north to our closest neighbor and NATO ally, but not at all to denigrate or disrespect the Canadian government, armed forces, or people. 80% of my sources used are non-US, and the US-based sources that I did use are largely defense think tanks or objective data sources. Since most of you are Canadians and somehow linked to CIDP or the CAF, you've likely heard a lot of what I'm going to cover today. I wrote my research paper with the intended audience of field grade US military officers. As one and prior to my arrival, I assumed that our fellow NATO allies, especially Canada, were militarily ready and prepared to respond to the collective defense of all members. And speaking with Major General Dean Milner, retired Canadian Army, he said that when he was working with now retired General Milley, our former chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff, General Milley also believed the CAF was a robust and ready fighting force that would always be prepared to respond. In the end, I hope to get your candid feedback as students and experts in international defense policy on my content, gaps, assumptions, and so forth, so I can have a more complete research paper. So shown as an abbreviated exchange between a U.S. Army National Guard soldier and the Secretary of Defense back in 2004. I'll give you a minute to read that. The General or Secretary Rumsfeld was my guest speaker at West Point on May 29th, 2004. Okay. That was before he said this. And I can tell you, he was not my first choice in a graduation speaker. We basically sat on all our bleachers at Mikey Stadium, absolutely preparing to die. I mean, that was the way his speech went. Like, it is over. But when this came out, I remember hearing about it on the news as a brand new second lieutenant in the middle of my field artillery basic officer training course at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It angered me immensely to hear this, that soldiers are expected to pony up, deploy, and fight regardless of how prepared their military is. However, Secretary Rumsfeld curt and unsettling response is a very unpopular truth. Readiness is the undisputed core of a military force's role in warfare. Without a high level of readiness, the force cannot respond, persevere, and achieve victory on a foreign battlefield. For the purpose of my research, I've defined readiness as the Canadian Armed Forces' ability to deploy and implement its authorized personnel, equipment, services, and support, and other wartime resources, and be ready to win on a foreign battlefield. So during World War II, nearly 10% of Canadians served in the Canadian military or other supporting entity. Nearly 1 in 10 served. Remember that for later. In 1946, the Canadian military was limited to 25,000 people. Most countries involved in World War II also reduced the size of their respective militaries simultaneously. From my research, I've concluded that there have been 2 periods after World War II where there was a dramatic decrease in defense spending, and defense is a priority with the Canadian government, and I assume with the people. The first being the decade leading up to unification in 1968, the second being the late 1980s and early 1990s, which is highlighted by the vertical blue line at the top right, and a period called the Decade of Darkness by retired Canadian General Rick Hillier. Since these 2 periods, the CAF's readiness has historically been well below its self-professed operational ready rates. I make this claim based on 2 relevant factors: defense spending and personnel authorizations and strengths. The defense spending 10-year average from 1960 to 1970 was 3.3% of GDP. The next 2 decades leading up to the late 1980s averaged 1.9%, then 1.6% in the 1990s, and for the past 2 decades, the 10-year average hovered around 1.2%. Next, I'd like to focus on personnel strengths as depicted in the attached chart. The CAF's regular or active duty forces personnel strength has steadily decreased since the 1980s, which correlates with the steady decrease in defense spending over the same term. The CAF's regular force is authorized 71,500 with 64,700 currently assigned, which is approximately 90%, but the trained effective strength is less than 53,000, meaning that only 74% of the regular force from an authorization perspective is trained and ready to execute their duties. The CAF's reserve force is authorized 30,000 personnel with 22,000 currently assigned, which equates to 73% of current strength. Overall, the force is at 85% strength, but not counting those classified as trainees, transients, and students. Basically, that population that's not accounted for is a non-operational population that can't be employed in the event that they're called upon. It's unrealistic to expect the CAF to be manned at the same level as the US military, so I use the government of Australia and the Australian Defence Forces as a more relevant comparison. The EDF is about the same size as the CAF, has about half the population of Canada, but it's also short personnel currently operating at approximately 80%. However, this past year, the government of Australia published its first national security strategy to pave the path forward towards its military's required capabilities and readiness, a critical step that I will cover in detail later. The chart shown reflects the service member to citizen ratio of the US, Australia, and Canada. Added this metric to illustrate the military personnel relative to the respective population. If you remember, during World War II, the ratio was 1 to 10 for Canada. I post this not as a got you that the CAF should have more service members relative to their population, although that can be noted, but rather ask, does Canada as a whole value service to the nation and truly care enough to prioritize defense better than it has for the past 3 decades? Just my personal observation, but I believe it's very easy for the average Canadian to not know a CAF member or really even see them in their community. Kingston's considered a military town, but unless you're near CFB Kingston or RMC, not seeing a CAF member is very easy. Next, I'd like to look at the CAF's operational effectiveness metrics. The CAF's target for the percentage of force elements ready for operations is 90%. So they're aiming to have 90% of their elements ready to deploy at any given time. In 2022, the CAF's readiness rate was 71%. In 2023, it was 61%. In 1 year, the CAF's overall readiness decreased 10%, resulting in the CAF being nearly 30% below its own readiness standard. In March 2024, the DND stated that only 58% of the CAF would be able to respond if called upon by NATO allies right now, and almost half the military's equipment is considered unavailable and unserviceable. This is one of the most critical concerns I have, especially going back to the Rumsfeld quote, "You go to war with the army you have." The CAF acknowledges the key risks to their 2024-2025 readiness objective on their own website, citing key risks that they will not have the right military personnel in the right numbers with the right competencies in the right place at the right time, and they may have difficulty maintaining its material capabilities at the right level to support operations. A statement on the Government of Canada's Ready Forces website, the same report that highlights the CAF is at nearly 30% deficit of its targeted operational readiness rate, also reads, Canadian Armed Forces are ready to conduct concurrent operations. So what caused the decrease in the CAF's readiness? My conclusion is that Canada for a long time has not prioritized defense or the military because of their close proximity and favorable relationship with the United States. One can argue that it goes back to the Monroe Doctrine published in 1823, or more recently, President Roosevelt's speech in 1938 when he was in Kingston receiving his honorary Doctor of Laws degree, ironic that we're in the law building. And he did this just 1 mile west at Queen's Richardson Stadium. He stated, "I give to you assurance that the people of the United States will not stand idly by if domination of Canadian soil is threatened by any other empire." Although FDR's comments are nearly 90 years old, I think they speak to the defense culture still prevalent in Canada today. I'll highlight a few more recent failures, specifically within the past decade, to keep it relevant for today's readiness concerns. Going back to my opening comments, Canada's Defense Minister, the Honorable Bill Blair, summarized the issue well as he spoke of the death spiral. Failing recruiting efforts for 3 years and ultimately losing more people from the CAF than they're able to onboard has further perpetuated the deficit in personnel. A massive shortage in personnel, in my opinion, is the foundation for the dismal level of readiness. When you are excessively short people, you can't man platforms. The daily duties and work get spread across those that are available. That affects morale and unit effectiveness, which can cause a decrease in mental wellness of service members and families, and it can also contribute to stress, misconduct, and ultimately readiness. These issues are also compounded by when CAF members' housing does not adequately maintain, strategic platforms are not able to be manned or serviceable. CAF training and educational opportunities are severely limited. CAF members are paying out of pocket for official travel and the other effects of suboptimal funding. The failed recruiting efforts can be attributed to many factors, COVID, but really it started well before 2020. Gen Z's lack of interest in serving, that's a factor that affects the US and Australia as well. Ultimately, it comes down to the defense culture in Canada. There doesn't seem to be a real drive to meet recruiting numbers, increase defense spending, or innovate to the required level as a contributing member of NATO. The threats may not directly link to Canada, but there are threats, real threats to NATO. Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, the Royal Canadian Navy commander, just stated about 1 year ago, despite their very best efforts, the Canadian Forces Recruiting Group has not delivered the required intake for the Navy for over 10 years. Topshee insists we have no choice but to change as we undertake the largest peacetime recapitalization in our history, and this is the perfect opportunity to reimagine our entire human resources model. In fiscal year 23-24, nearly 71,000 Canadian citizens submitted applications to serve in the CAF, but only 4,300 were enrolled. That's approximately 6% of those who express interest to serve. Canada's House of Commons National Defence Committee Chair, John McKay, inquired into the recruiting shortfalls. He told the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff that if there are 70,000 people outside the door who want to get in and are by and large qualified to serve, and we have a 16,000 person deficit, meaning people are leaving more quickly than they're being replaced, commitments to improving sound like a series of excuses. He continued by stating the CAF's personnel crisis was due to its own recruiting failures and bureaucratic processes that were unsuccessful in capitalizing on a willing and able population ready to serve. Furthermore, Lieutenant General retired Guy Thibault, the former Vice Chief of the Defense Staff, stated in an interview that based on the CAF's overall readiness level, you can't help but conclude that Canada needs to invest more in its fundamental insurance for securing the country. So the CAF is identifying areas where they can address problematic areas and requirements to streamline the onboarding experience. I'm sure it's more extensive than what I've listed here, but these are the ones that I decided to pick out and to highlight today. Many of the CAF's initiatives parallel those being implemented by the Australian Defence Forces, specifically widening eligibility criteria, streamlining the recruiting system, improving internal processes, and improving services and programs and incentives to encourage the retention of personnel. One of the incentives is suspending the Canadian Forces aptitude test for nearly 50 military occupations. And for CAF jobs that still require the CFAT, the test is delayed until after contracts are signed. This adjustment to the CFAT was implemented because 60% of the prospective new recruits failed to show up for the CFAT. In 2022, Canada implemented a change that would permit non-citizen permanent residents to serve in the CAF to help fill thousands of unfilled positions across the force. However, as outlined above, there's no shortage of interest from citizens or non-citizens to join the CAF, but an extreme backlog in security clearance processing for non-citizen caused this initiative to be near valueless. From 2022 to 2023, only 77 of more than 21,000 non-citizen permanent residence applicants were accepted into the CAF, meaning less than 1% of those interested were able to join. Another initiative was launched in March of 2023 by the Royal Canadian Navy called the Naval Experience Program as a pilot, a one-year paid internship that provides same pay, compensation, and benefits of all CAF members for NEP participants. NEP interns attend the standard 8-week basic military qualification course, then attend 4 weeks of naval training before spending the remainder of the year experiencing the life of a sailor. Most NEP interns make $40,000 per year in this program. After the year is complete, the interns have the opportunity to stay in the Navy and apply for a trade that is a better fit, or they can leave the service with no strings attached. I truly wish this is a program that the US military would implement, as I really believe the multi-year commitment is the biggest obstacle for someone who is inclined to join the military. Having the option to try it out with no strings attached, I believe would provide a substantial number of young people to sign up to the US military as well. Those who are otherwise eligible and interested but hesitant due to the unknown and a lengthy contractual commitment. The bottom two are initiatives that should address issues that have caused massive delays in onboarding the new service members. These initiatives will certainly increase efficiency, but I believe there are more permanent areas of reform that must also be addressed. In my research paper, I make 3 recommendations that I believe would profoundly affect the CAF's readiness. These are the same recommendations I came up with last fall, but the justification and importance for these changes are even more crucial now, given the drastic changes that have occurred in the geopolitical realm. Canada, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, is realizing that it cannot rely so heavily on the US military and cannot assume it will always have a favorable relation with the US. So first, implement a plan to increase defense spending to at least 2% as soon as possible and higher if feasible. Although it may seem like an arbitrary metric, funding defense to this level will better allow the CAF to train its people, maintain its facilities and platforms, and begin to restore readiness and its ability to respond to domestic events and foreign conflict. As a secondary effect, the increase in funding could also be used to expand and build better systems to combat the backlog in security clearances, medical processing, and other functions to streamline the recruiting and onboarding of new CAF members. My opinion is Canada should look at how they can realistically and expeditiously get to 4% to address the current severe concerns and scale back as operational readiness and manning levels improve. Second, implement an actionable national security strategy, a strategic framework to guide the significant and urgent changes required to transform the defense's capabilities, force posture, force structure, procurement, recruiting, and international engagement. Part of implementing a strategy is to include enabling functions to ensure an oversight committee is monitoring progress and compliance in accordance with the ends, ways, and means, and ensuring funding is programmed towards the CAF's readiness. To quote Dr. English, who is present here today, the D&D has often used perpetual risk management and a fury of activities as ways to try to obscure the fact that the government is not prepared to allocate resources necessary to seriously address critical aspects of the CAF's personnel problems. When the US military misses their recruiting goal for 1 year, service secretaries and chiefs are called to testify to Congress on their strategy to increase recruiting successes. I believe Parliament needs to be just as concerned and just as demanding if they're serious about Canada's defense. Third, unnecessary bureaucratic processes, red tape, and hindrances that prevent CAF general officers and general and flag officers from making substantive change. This is prevalent in procurement, medical screening, security clearances, and processing, and increasing trading capacity and trading seats for service members. I acknowledge the US is perceived as a military industrial complex. Our defense industry is massive, and our $880 billion defense budget is unmatched. However, from first contact with a potential recruit, we can have them in boots and enrolled in basic training in less than 60 days. As of last fall, it was reported that the CAF takes 6 to 12 months to contract a future service member, and some are waiting 18 to 24 months before they can attend basic military qualification. This backlog is another effect of being undermanned. It's difficult to increase training capacity when you don't have the people to do the jobs in the first place. I believe numerous internal changes could help make monumental improvements and better facilitate attracting and onboarding new military members. But if there isn't pressure from Parliament to meet recruiting numbers, well, you can only expect what you inspect. These recommendations are all interconnected, and for there to be progress, there needs to be an increase in the intensity and priority of this endeavor and more support and pressure from the government. In closing, and to quote Dr. Andrew Latham, Canada's once strong contributions to NATO have faded, widening the gap between lofty rhetoric and actual defense investments. As the closest neighbor to the United States and a prominent member of NATO, the Group of Seven, Five Eyes, I hope Canada will address the absence of a national security strategy, increase defense funding, and implement long-term planning and programming of funds to improve the CAF's readiness. And thank you all for coming here today. I welcome any feedback, recommendations, or perspectives to strengthen my research or better understand the dynamics that I've missed or are incomplete. Thank you.
Now, everyone, I have a microphone, not because your booming voices need the microphone to talk to Drew, but because we're recording this. And for the podcast, we need to use the mic so that your voices are intelligible on the podcast. So, questions? Does anybody like anybody laid off? Okay, Steve, I see you. Sorry.
Thanks, Howard. Drew, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. With regards to your research, and speaking with former and retired members of the Canadian Armed Forces, what was your views on leadership and that drive that comes from leaders to make change, make things happen, specifically with regards to recruiting, retention, and ultimately growth? And I asked that question having come 30 years British Army, 3 years in the Canadian Army Reserve here in Kingston. My view is, leadership is particularly important. What are your views with regards to what you've seen in your research?
So
Thank you.
are you specifically looking at military leadership? Okay.
Initially,
Uniform?
yes.
Okay. Yeah. So my perspective, and I'll be honest, I talked to one of my former bosses that works at Human Resources Command yesterday. And I've told this to Chris, Colonel Chris Purdy, who's in here. I don't think that I would serve in the CAF. And it's not because of the quality of the CAF. It's because of the perceived lack of interest from the government. I don't think they are valued. I don't think the CAF is valued at the same level that the US military is in the States. So then when I see leaders like Adam Moore and Chris Purdy, who I think are phenomenal warriors, and I think they're going to go out and do amazing things, I don't think that they are enabled. I don't think they're empowered to the same level that we are. And I think a lot of the constraints that they have as uniform members, we don't really have those constraints. Each year we have our National Defense Authorization Act, which is usually it's every year, every 2 years is added to and passed into law, which programs fundings, and then it also gives us the additional authorizations to make that prudent change at the service level. It gives us the ability as uniform members to really implement these things where it comes to recruiting, talent management, how we're dealing with culture, the same thing that you guys deal with in the CAF. We have the exact same stuff, just at a much larger scale. So that's my perspective. I can't speak on behalf of all the uniform members' leadership, but I just think they have a much more uphill battle than we have down in the U.S. military.
Yep. Thanks, Drew.
Yes,
So political leadership. I'd say from a British Army perspective, we were told, no uncertain terms, it's a leadership issue. And our colonel of regiment, lieutenant general at that point, took it upon himself to drive our recruiting. And as units, we conducted our own recruiting out in the community and were seen, keeping the Army in the public eye, CAPE. And that's how we, as my former regiment, how we survived as a regiment, given the cuts and the amalgamations that have occurred through centuries in the British Army. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, sir. Thank you for speaking. My question is, what are some barriers to women's recruitment into the CAF that has been removed recently since General Kerrigan has been in office as leading the CAF?
Yeah, I didn't specifically look at women recruiting. I looked at it systematically across the realm. I don't think they're getting the people they need regardless of gender. I think you need people ready to fight and people to fill positions before you need to look at what they look like.
Hi there. You mentioned the difference between the Canadian Armed Forces. When I joined, it took about 10 months from applying to get enrolled. And you said it's about 2 months to the American military. What is the difference further to that from, starting your basic training and getting your trades qualification, operational functional point? Because I know we have a long delay in the Canadian Armed Forces due to lack of instruction and training delays. What's the approximate timeline for advanced individual training for U.S. military?
Yeah, so specific to your last point, advanced individual training after they've done the basic training or basic military qualification, generally it depends on your MOS, your military occupational specialty. If you're going to be, some sort of a low density MOS where, they only have a course start twice a year, you will wait for those. If you're going to go be an infantry, artillery, supply, human resources, those classes start every 2 weeks in the U.S. military. Now, obviously, that's again part of scale. When you have, a military our size, we have a much larger training capacity. However, I think it's all I think the ratio is about the same. If it's funded right and you're manned to the levels you need to be, you're able to implement those courses. But I'll give the Canadian Armed Forces the benefit of the doubt. When you have as many MOSs as you all have, and you don't have as big of a military, it's a challenge. The other part, kind of to your first point, the point in which you're talking to a new recruit and then they are onboarded and the security clearance and the medical, I think those things are something that are easy fixes. So one, we run our own security clearances. Okay, it happens at the Human Resources Command. So at Fort Knox, Kentucky, we run our own security clearances. We have a section that does that, and they knock them out. Okay, it doesn't go to the government level. It's not even at the DoD level. Each service manages those security clearances. So that's one other thing that's taken down a notch, and we're able to do that at our level. Second, medical, I just think there's a much broader and much more stout medical support system in our military entrance processing stations that make those appointments more available. So there are some dynamics in there that are different just based on the two countries, but I think those are easy wins if they can push those down to a lower level.
Thank you for the presentation, Drew. That was really good. You emphasized pretty thoroughly the personnel issues throughout your presentation, and then you raised some of the material issues that you viewed in the CAF. In the course of your research, did you view those two dimensions in isolation, or did you approach them congruently?
Yeah, so I purposely did not approach capabilities. I did specifically talk about some of the platforms that aren't able to be manned. I tried to focus on the personnel realm because that's what I am, a personnelist. So just from that standpoint, I look at it, like I said, when you have a shortage of personnel, that's going to be the starter. You can have the best jets, you can have the best nuclear submarines, but if you can't put people in them to move them, you don't have a force. And I think that's step one. They've got to fix the shortage in personnel. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, that way. Sorry. What I think you're not taking into account is the fact that Canadians right now are really riled up. And I think our whole defense establishment is going to change. As our prime minister said yesterday or the day before, our relationship with the United States has changed forever. It has. I mean, I don't like it. It's too bad, but it has. Are Canadians riled up right now? Sure. Do I think recruiting is going to go on a big uptake? Yes. Somebody back there, I don't know what was you, sorry, mentioned leadership. When Churchill came up here in December of 1941, he gave that wonderful speech. All the Canadians across the country were listening in on the radio. What happened? We had 39 operational aircraft in 1939. By the end of the war, we were the fourth largest air force in the world. I don't know about the other parts. But it seems to me that you've been babysitting Canadians. Sure, Trump now has got us all worked up, and that's a good thing. I think everything is going to change. And I'm hoping that Canadians get the spirit that we had in World War II. When we built thousands of planes, what do we want the F-35s for? We built all that stuff here. We can. We've done it before. Do I like being riled up against the Americans? No, you're a 6'8" guy. And I love you.
They all look just like me.
I mean, we all love the Americans. We do, but we're mad. And you don't get Canadians mad because once you do, look at John A. Macdonald in 1891. He was a loser. He was going to go down. And then there were the McKinley tariffs, and everybody went running around and they said, hey, what are you guys trying to do to us? And the Americans said, well, we're just trying to take you over. And John A. said, what did he say again? It was remember he had the flag in the election of 1891. And I can't remember what it said. He had this great propaganda thing. And he won the majority again, the old boy, because the Americans were going on about how we wanted, we aren't a natural country, they said. McKinley said that. Today you have a president saying the same thing. You don't think we're mad? We are. You don't think recruitment is going to change? It will. I have that. It means nothing, but
Yeah,
I hope you're not mad.
I'm not mad. And I hope more than anything that you're right. But like I said, I mean, there's no shortage of interest in Canadians that want to serve. So is the system going to get fixed? That's the bottleneck. That's the problem. I think you could easily have a 500,000 person army if you wanted, or military if you wanted one. But I also question, do the Canadian people want that? I don't know. I didn't dig into any polls to see what's the appetite for a larger defense budget and a larger military. I don't know. It's probably much higher today than it was in July. Yeah.
Drew, I promise you a softball. I'm not sure if I'm going to follow through with that one, but so Colonel Tyler Donnell. So I was here at CIDB before Drew, and have had the honor of then transitioning over to the CAF, where I'm now the deputy commander of the Canadian Army Training and Doctrine Center. That runs then all the initial entry training and everything else that kind of Drew has highlighted here. And so I think one quick comment to emphasize what Drew is talking about, because what he's discussing is the missing middle, which is that captain and master corporal rank that hasn't been retained. That is then the force that should be training and growing the next iteration of the CAF, and they're just not there to do it. So we're already operating at a huge deficit in that perspective. Drew highlighted the issues of recruitment and getting folks into uniform. And just an antidote, a student that was here with us last year that was interested in working with the CIDP had to wait till he had his graduate from Queens, and he's still waiting to get into the CAF. He had the desire to serve the day he left Queens a year ago at graduation, and the CAF can't get him into uniform. And so just a single, and so I had to refill out his survey for entry into the CAF yesterday. And he's been knocking on the door for now over a year to get into the CAF, as just a way to describe the broken process that Drew is highlighting here. And what we're now seeing, again, being on the inside looking out and not getting into too many specifics, as you look at bringing the permanent residents in, there's issues with getting Canadian citizenship, getting passports to be able to deploy outside of the country. And so although it's been described as a way to get those who are interested in becoming Canadian citizens into uniform, it's coming to a second and third order effects that weren't understood or described by the Canadian government. And so now you maybe have a disenfranchised piece of the CAF who want to serve, who are now sitting on their rucksacks and can't serve because of security clearance concerns, citizenship concerns, and other things. And so I'm concerned that some of those mitigations will end up turning into more disruptors than other things. And so again, but things to start vocalizing, again, I think a lot of the folks in this room want this all to work, want to fix this. But it is going to take a lot of government focus to get there. And so that's a long statement to then say, Drew, from all this, what's the one thing that you're going to bring back to the States as something positive that you're learning from this to now implement in your next position as a G1?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing I picked up was, and kind of what I alluded to at the very beginning, the amazing people that I've met here. I mean, you're not much different than us. And I talked about some earlier, there's a lot going on south of the border. It's not everybody. We're all, we for the majority and the aggregate, I'd say, we have the same mentality a lot of the Canadians do. Like, we just want to live in peace. We want to be good neighbors. We want to look out for each other. That's part of the NATO mission, is looking out for those in NATO, being prepared to defend those when necessary. But really just, and I'm not going to take this back. Although I wrote my research paper from the standpoint to educate a field grade U.S. military officer so they know. I mean, if you dig into the NATO website, you can see who's pulling their weight from a defense spending standpoint. The metrics for our biggest allies, the UK, their military, I think it wasn't too far off their military service member to citizen ratio from Canada. So it's pretty close. So, it's not one that say that, we're the only ones pulling the weight, because that's kind of been vocalized in the political realm that we're not going to pull the weight of everybody else anymore. We'll see how things pan out. It's my position to remain apolitical. So as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.
Sir, thank you for speaking today and for your research. It's definitely very important, especially in today's climate. And I was curious, so you mentioned about retention a lot and that Canada is struggling to retain our troops. We're losing more than we're bringing in or we're able to bring in. So throughout your research, have you found any factors that have led to such issues with retention? And if so, are some of those challenges mirrored in the United States military? Are you guys experiencing those same challenges? And if so, what can be done to mitigate them and overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so we have almost identical problems on the south side. A few more, okay. I mean, I talked in length in Dr. English's class, in his history class when I was a battalion commander. I probably had 40 sexual assaults in 2 years. Not that they happened in my battalion, but most of them happened in basic training, then they matriculated over. And my role was to take care of the victims in those cases. And we did that. We proudly took care of our people. But a lot of the same issues that the CAF deals with, we have them as well. So I would say, I think one of the biggest differences is I think there's a lack of focus on how well or how effective junior leaders can be in implementing change and changing culture. So what was the honor to serve? Is that what it was called? General Vance? Operation Honor. So I don't know that in detail, but when I was researching, I kind of dug into that a little bit, and it just seemed like a lot of, hey, do this, hey, do this, hey, do this. And that just doesn't work. I mean, that works when, you've got a 1-page op order for Normandy, hey, get on the boats. When the boat stops, okay, run out and kill as many as you can before they kill you. Okay. That's the only time. That doesn't work with culture. That will never work with culture. I can tell you, I had a marginal effect on culture in my battalion. I think I improved it before I left. But really where I was able to really leverage the changing culture was with those first line leaders, with those drill sergeants, specifically in my battalion, or the company commanders that were actually around. They were actually talking to people. They were getting the vibe. And what is the state of morale in those units? And ours was ever changing. I mean, we had a new group coming in every week and a group graduating every week. So a lot of turnover because we were on a training mission. But I think that's one of the biggest issues with the CAF and their culture is you don't have enough people empowered at the lower level to spread their wings out and empower their peers and those directly below them. But if you've got generals and you've got service secretary equivalents just saying do this, do this, do this, it's just not going to be as effective. You got to have buy-in, and the only way you're going to have buy-in is when you see people linking arms saying we're not going to do this in our military. And we still have those issues, but I think that's one thing that we're doing is, one, we don't tolerate it at all. I was interested also to find out in your regulations, there's no fraternization clause saying that you can't have relations with other people in the military. Like that's really interesting. You want to eradicate inappropriate relationships, but you don't specifically say that it's not permitted. Like left hand's not saying what or isn't matching the right hand.
And so I just had a quick follow-up to that, because you mentioned like the Naval Experience Program as a 1-year opportunity for people to sign on with the goal of increasing recruitment, but also with the hopes of retaining the members who sign up for these programs. Have these been successful, or are the challenges with retention that exist on like the master corporal level also permeating through those programs in the people's first year's experience with the
so the NEP, I didn't record it in my notes here. It's in my paper, but it's been wildly effective. Really effective. I mean, the people that There was a good majority that stayed right there in their trade, but there were some that also switched over. Obviously, some left, but I think they aimed for 60%. I think they got like 85% retained. So again, like you see those kind of numbers, and especially in the US military, we're not dying for people now, but we had about a 3-year lull where we were also not meeting recruiting mission. I remember working in personnel readiness back in 2018, and we had a slight decrease. And the same guy I talked to yesterday, our readiness division chief, he said this 3-month, basically quarter where we're not going to meet mission, it's going to take us 2 years to fix. So you just think about a 3-year drop or a 10-year, failure to meet recruiting, how long that's going to take in the absence of a real drive or change in the people that just decide, hey, I want to join, and now the systems support me, joining or increasing the size of the military and not having a backlog.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So my name's Susan. I'm from the Canadian Institute for Military Veteran Health Research here in Kingston. And I'm kind of curious about, so leading up to recruitment is just awareness. And from a civilian perspective, right, a lot of civilians are not even aware of all of the opportunities that exist within the Canadian Forces. And I can speak from my role teaching teacher service candidates, right? So in a faculty of education, nowhere is built into our curriculum, even just exposure. So students in grade 6 to high school, exposure about the careers that exist, right? So unless you're from, honestly, a military family where you're actually told all of these opportunities, those opportunities aren't available so much in our civilian education role.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in the States, you have maybe more presence within the civilian communities. And like you said, in Kingston, you might bump into a CAF member.
Mhm.
You go to Toronto, you go to Hamilton, you go to Niagara, unless you're specifically looking for one,
Yeah.
it doesn't hit your radar.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
We are a little better. Obviously our ratio, about 160 or 163 to 1, our civilian or population to service member ratio. So it's a lot easier to see. And then military towns in the US are military towns. Like they are everywhere. Soldiers have Corvettes and big trucks and they're all over the place. So we are not as integrated in the schools as we once were. There's been some pullback on that. I think that's probably going to increase with some of the political things that are going right now. We'll see, just my speculation, but we are more integrated. We do have recruiters that go talk to guidance counselors. They talk to them about the opportunities. I don't think that we do a good enough job either, like getting it out there. And really our number one tie to future service members are family members, like, saying, hey, I served 20 years in the military, you ought to try it. Here's what I did. I don't think it's, I think it's better than it used to be in the States, where it used to be that, being in the military was kind of like plan C. If you didn't, if plan A and plan B didn't work out, then I'll join the military. In fact, I was a law intern at West Point, and I shadowed a district attorney in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is where Fort Bragg is. And he was an infantry officer. And I remember sitting in one of his hearings, and there was a young man who had basically beat his mom up, and the defense lawyer basically told the judge, he said, hey, he's done the ASVAB, which is our CFAT, and if he passes that, he's going to join the military. And the judge said, okay, you can avoid jail time if you join the military. And it's just like, oh my God, like this guy beat up his mom. What's he going to do to his commanding officer when he tells him no? So we don't have that as much anymore. Actually, if you have a criminal record, it's really hard to get in. But we've kind of gone through the same things. But again, like you have to ask, or I ask, like, what's the appetite for the Canadian people to really have a fully integrated military into their society? Is it an occupation of choice? It doesn't seem to be. It seems like plan C.
Other questions?
So my question is, right now, it seems after the Cold War, the whole NATO is not ready for war. Just the military spending has been decreasing, and right now, just the threat has been appearing like in the Cold War, but things are not turning better. For example, like in Taiwan, their military spending is still decreasing. So I want to ask about what do you think is the reason for that, and how can the solution be?
I probably can't speak on that too much. I can't speak for why Taiwan's defense spending is going down. Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean it's like for all NATO countries.
For NATO countries?
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you we're looking at increase in ours. We're asking other NATO countries to increase theirs to the minimum 2%. But I really can't speak to that. Yeah. I
Great,
don't know.
thanks.
That was great. Thank you, Drew. That was amazing. So at one point in terms of like your research, I know you touched on a couple of points. So there is a recruitment modernization that is so many initiatives that, and you touched on some of them. So it might be something just to look at, and partly because of the recruitment modernization that is happening, including you can apply online, there's no more CFAT. Some medical conditions are now not a barrier to be recruited, like say asthma, anxiety, or ADHD type of stuff. And there's the probation that you mentioned. And then, there is an increase in applications, like significant, like say something like 20% from last year, and I believe something like 50% from the year before. And so people are getting through the door quicker. So there's more interest, and people are getting through the door more quickly. So something to think about. And also, and this was mentioned by another person in the audience, there, partly there is an increase in patriotism. I'm sure you guys have seen it. You go to the stores. We now have flags on all the Canadian products in the grocery stores. People actually are looking for Canadian products. So we don't have a survey right now to say, okay, this, these are the reasons why there's more people that are applying. But I would say the modernization, the opening, the recruiting to permanent residents, and the increase in patriotism in the overall Canadian population are probably all factors that, so I think there's hope going forward. And, there will be more money coming into the forces, including increasing the salaries of our members, which is going to be huge, right? Because obviously the economy is not, is kind of uncertain right now. So the military offers the good careers, the good jobs, the benefits, and the salaries go up, there's going to be even more interest. So just some food for thought, but it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope that it does increase. I really do.
I'm going to cut off questions now because we're running out of time. However, if Drew can stay around for a few minutes, I'm sure he'd be more than glad to have some follow-on engagements. I'd like to thank him for coming here today, showing a great degree of personal courage and taking on this topic. I never thought I'd be going to a CIDP research talk where the person giving the talk might have to wear body armor. So, but
Bulletproof glass.
But he did a great job, right? So everybody, thank you very much, Drew. Really appreciate it.
Okay.